The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman was once told by someone from a major health organization that the person you report to at work can be more important to your health than your family doctor. It makes sense considering you see your leader at work almost daily, and you see your primary care physician far less often. But it's about more than just the sheer time spent at work. It's about the direct effect our work and our work environment has on our health. And we're not talking about the effects of manual labor, we're talking about stress. Our guest on the podcast today is Jeffrey Pfeffer, an author of several books on company culture and a professor at Stanford. Recently, he said this in an op-ed through the BBC. Quote, "The aptly named American Institute of Stress claims that workplace stress costs the American economy some $300 billion each year. A paper I co-authored in a leading peer-reviewed journal estimated that there were 120,000 extra deaths annually in the U.S. from harmful management practices, and that extra healthcare costs were $190 billion each year. That would make the workplace the fifth leading cause of death, worse than kidney disease or Alzheimer's. In the UK, the Health and Safety Executive reported that 12.5 million working days were lost from work-related stress, depression, or anxiety in 2016 to 2017, end quote. Jeffrey has a new book, Dying for a Paycheck, where he basically contends that the workplace is killing us and nobody cares. Barry-Wehmiller's Director of Communications, Mary Rudder, and I talked to Jeffrey about all of this on this week's Everybody Matters podcast. And we begin by asking him where he got the idea for studying this issue and for his book.
It came from my sitting on the Stanford Committee for Faculty and Staff Human Resources, which is basically the Stanford Committee on Health Insurance, and also some years ago on the Hewitt Human Capital Leadership Council, which is basically Hewitt's some of their largest clients. And I noticed in both committees, employers seem to be reasonably enough obsessed with healthcare costs, and I use the word obsessed intentionally. There is a healthcare cost crisis around the globe, as everybody knows, and it occurred to me as I listened to the discussion that while there was a lot of discussion about the organization of healthcare and hospital management, and there was certainly a lot of a focus on what you could get to individuals to take more responsibility for their health, that it struck me just intuitively that there was a big piece missing, which was, people spend a lot of their day at work, and there was no consideration of the effect of the work environment on people's health and their health-related behaviors. So when an opportunity came for me to participate in a conference, I asked the conference organizer, my friend Nuria Chinchilla at ESA in Barcelona Business School, if I could do something not on work and family, which was the main focus of the conference, but on health. And then I, began reading the epidemiological literature and found that there was an enormous amount of evidence on this issue. And then proceeded to get more involved and more, frankly, upset about what I was learning. That the workplace. As your CEO is fond of saying, according to the Mayo Clinic, the person you report to at work is more important for your health than your family doctor, which is certainly true. And his thing I quote him in the book, in which he says, I stood up in front of 1,000 CEOs in San Antonio and told them they are the cause of the healthcare crisis, because most healthcare costs comes from chronic disease, which is correct. That's what the World Economic Forum data will show you. Chronic disease comes from the behaviors and stress that's created in the workplace, and so therefore the employers really are responsible for not only the healthcare cost crisis, but for a lot of death and suffering. So that's kind of how this all happened.
So let's kind of take a step back. What is the natural knee-jerk reaction of a company when they're looking at rising healthcare costs? What's their natural inclination to either blame it on and to try to fix the problem?
Well, the natural inclination is to blame it on the unhealthy behaviors of the human beings who are working for them, not quite understanding the extent to which those health-relevant behaviors are coming from, in part, from the work environment. And their natural inclination is, of course, to do what most organizations have done, which is shift costs in a variety of different ways to the employees. And so then the Kaiser Family Foundation data on this is absolutely clear. Over the years, a smaller percentage of employers even offer health insurance, and those that do have shifted costs, either through shifting premiums or co-payments or deductibles or some combination of the three. So there's been a lot of cost shifting.
Yeah. As you've presented this material, you've clearly written a book, and I think you've done peer-reviewed papers on this before as well, before you even started the book. As you presented this research, your research, what has been the reaction from the business community over this?
Well, to be honest, I think the reaction from the business community is to ignore it. They are hoping that nobody's going to pick this up and that the problem will somehow go away. That is often, by the way, as you guys know, the reaction to the business community to many problems.
Exactly.
And not only this, and not only in this domain. I mean, oftentimes, business leaders hope that, if they ignore it, it'll disappear.
Well, what's the first step? What do you want them to do?
I think the first step is to kind of get the word out, to make, as Bob Chapman, of course, has also been trying to do, to make it clear that this is a serious and substantial issue, which has, the workplace is, according to our estimates, the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. And unlike the other leading causes of death in the United States, completely preventable, not 100%, but we could cut the toll dramatically. You don't have to do some exotic, medical research or, pray for some breakthrough as we would with Alzheimer's or kidney disease. I mean, this is really a preventable cause of death, and we ought to be preventing it. So I think we need to bring this to people's attention, as I'm trying to do, as Bob is trying to do, as a bunch of other people are trying to do, and then try to convince either companies or the government or human beings to form some kinds of social movements or nonprofit organizations, something to bring pressure to bear so that things will change.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about some of the more startling things you discovered during your research.
The most startling thing I discovered is that as bad as the problem is, it's actually, as bad as the problem I thought was, it's worse. I think the most startling thing I discovered, I gave a talk on this, the Human Resource Institute in New Zealand last fall, and I said, I have two pieces of information for you. Number one, the workplace is killing people. That's bad. The second piece of information I think is worse. As near as I could determine, no one cares. I mean, not no one. Bob Chapman cares. There are obviously a few CEOs and other people who care. But in general, there is remarkably little caring about this. And that has been a part of the response to the book that I find interesting. So people say, well, this is it. Stress is part of work. This is it. Work cultures are the way they are. This is it. Work is a four-letter word for a reason, etc. So there is a sense of resignation, even on the part of governments, not just the U.S. government. We won't even begin to discuss that. But even on the part of governments that are actually paying for these bills, there has been an amazing passivity towards addressing this issue.
Do you think that is because they don't want to accept liability, or maybe because they can't wrap their head around that line of thinking, or because to me, it seems like there's, with a cause and effect, if you're the cause and that's the effect, and the effect is high cost and all this kind of stuff, you'd want to address the cause. But do you think that there's they can't wrap their heads around the concept, or don't accept the liability, or what is it there?
I think they believe that human beings are. So my friend Nuria Chinchilla has this line, which I love in the book. It's one of my favorite lines. She says, "Why do we care more about polar bears than human beings?" And because with respect to the physical environment, there is not that level of passivity. Governments have refused to let companies externalize their costs of, polluting the air, water, and ground, and the companies are responsible for that, and companies have taken responsibility for being environmentally sustainable. Now, if you're environmentally sustainable, why shouldn't you be human sustainable? As I tell people, you're worried about, your carbon offsets and all this other stuff. You ought to worry about the carbon life forms that work for you, which are called human beings. But I have no idea why people are eschewing responsibility for this. But I think one thing that I've heard people say to me is, well, if people don't like what they are, they can go somewhere else. If people are getting made ill by the workplace, and nobody, by the way, denies the data or the effect of work environments on people's stress levels and health outcomes, but they'll say, well, if people can't hack it, they go somewhere else. And so there's a sense of agency with respect to people that you don't get with respect to trees or polar bears. So nobody expects a tree to move. Nobody expects a polar bear to necessarily, make a profound change in how it lives. But human beings are thought, to have this agency, and so therefore, if they're suffering, they need to do something about it themselves.
And in the book, this is what you essentially term social pollution.
That it is social pollution. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is.
How high do healthcare costs have to get?
Number one, where are we talking about? If we're talking about the U.S., I can do a lot of things to cut my healthcare costs without ever solving the fundamental underlying causal problem at all. I don't have to offer health insurance. Or if to the extent I do offer health insurance, I can redesign the health plans in ways that shift ever larger fraction of costs to employees, and in fact, I can insulate myself as an employer from any increase in healthcare costs, because basically what I can say to my insurance administrator is, every time the cost goes up, we're going to redesign the plan to pass all of this to deductibles, co-payments, or premium to the employees. So in that sense, they can avoid the costs if they're in the United States completely. So that's number one. Number two, having now participated in a couple of marketing events with Collective Health, and by the way, I think, Collective Health is an amazing health administrator. They're relatively small, but they are offering now, they're going nationwide, and they're fabulous. And unlike every other health administrator, who, by the way, have net promoter scores that are either in single digits or negative, their net promoter scores are in the 70s. So that's a whole nother story. But you look at, I've done these events with Collective Health, and one of the things I've learned, which isn't going to surprise either of you, is that benefits is contained. So you got a head of HR in these organizations, and the head of HR has delegated benefits to somebody whose job is benefits. And so there is a very segmented, microscopic view of this problem. So if you know this from working at Barry-Wehmiller. You know this from the quote of Bob Chapman: the person you report to at work is more important for your health than your family doctor. Mm-hmm. The person you report to at work, not your benefits administrator, not the head of HR. Right. So we're talking about changing work culture, and you got a benefits administrator, and they're smart, they're lovely human beings, but they do not have the leverage to change the culture of work. This has to happen from senior management levels, as you know.
But they are perplexed by the how, and that is what we find all the time. Most people, most leaders inherently believe that they want to do good by their people, but they just don't know how to do it. It takes a huge amount of courage and patience and money, really, to change culture.
I would challenge you on that. It actually doesn't take a lot of money. You can put in I have chapter 6 in this book, which Dying for a Paycheck, which talks about the two elements of a healthy workplace. One is social support, basically building a sense of community in the organization where people care for each other. That doesn't cost very much, or if anything. And secondly, giving people more autonomy on the job. That doesn't cost very much either. And in fact, research on job autonomy going back decades shows that when you give people more control over their work, what they do and how they do it, you treat them like the adult human beings that they are, their engagement goes up, their motivation goes up. So I don't think this is expensive at all.
So they read your book. What should they do the next day? What's the first thing they should do?
Well, I actually tell you, I can answer that question easily. We know from Management 101, or maybe even Management 1, and from the quality movement, that if you want to change something, the first thing you have to do is measure it. And so I would think you have to implement measures of health outcomes. It's interesting. I sit on the Stanford Committee for Faculty and Staff Human Resources. We get our health plan administrators. There are 4 of them because we offer 4 different major health plans to come in. And they, of course, talk about costs and utilization and changes in this and changes in that. And everybody, at the end of their presentation, everybody looks at me because they know the question I'm going to ask them. And the question I'm going to ask them is, I said, you've given us 20, 30, 40-minute presentation. During the entire 20, 30, 40-minute presentation, you have not talked about one measure of health, or health status, or health outcomes. Health and health benefits and the workplace needs to be about health. As to repeat again the quote of your CEO, Bob Chapman, who I love, this is about health. This is about health and well-being. This isn't just about money. This isn't just about all these technical measures of utilization and plan design and all this other stuff. So we need to measure health and health outcomes, which is actually quite straightforward to do.
So, if the way we're working isn't working, is this sustainable?
Yes, it apparently is. I have a friend. There are many books about trust in organizations, and many people say that trust is essential for organizational functioning, and my response is it clearly is not. Because if you look at the Edelman Trust Index, or the Edelman Trust Barometer, there is all-time record lows this year in trust in leaders, particularly business leaders around the world, and organizations seem to be working. So not necessarily well, not necessarily efficiently. Gallup will tell you employee engagement worldwide is at 15%, but it seems to be sustainable. I wouldn't have thought it was sustainable, but it seems to be sustainable.
So if this keeps going on generation after generation, what will it take for people to not accept this anymore? And
I don't know. So I'm talking to some lawyers, and one of them says this could be bigger than the tobacco litigation, but my friend of mine who's a law professor at Stanford, who by the way has read the book and loves it, says she does not believe the courts in the U.S. at least are going to intervene to do anything about this. Who knows? I really, at this moment, I don't know what it will take. I think it will take a social movement. I think it will take exactly what it took for the environmental movement. You and I have both already discussed the parallels in terms of social pollution versus environmental pollution, human sustainability and environmental sustainability. And what did it take to change our interactions and whatever with respect to the physical environment? It took, number one, decades, and number two, it took a persistent, consistent mobilization of human beings who said enough is enough, that we really do not want to pollute the world. And by the way, in case you haven't been reading the news, there's a little backsliding on that.
Mm-hmm. Have you met any people along the way that have shared their stories or specific situations?
Tons. And I get, by the way, once the book has come out, I got an email this morning. So, I get emails, I get basically now emails every day. So, and the emails are, the emails are in some cases detailed and in many cases unhappy. So, here is a thing, I won't name you the name, 1,000 thank yous, Dr. Pfeffer, for your work on the book, Dying for a Paycheck. I work for a major cruise line. As of May 7th, I have been on medical leave. The extreme working conditions drove me over the edge, so to speak. Thank you for validating my thoughts, feelings, and suspicions with this book. And, so yes, I get emails like that all the time. The workplace, we have way too many toxic workplaces, and people are being psychologically and physically damaged. And it's, I just think it's unconscionable, but it is what it is.
No, it shouldn't. It's not what it is. I mean, we're trying, as you see, people like Bob Chapman and the team at Barry-Wehmiller are really trying to change that, and we are with you in the cause. But it's taking a lot of voices, really loud voices, to try and shake things up a bit. But and there's signs of it, I think. I mean, you hear more and more about organizations trying to change, but nowhere near what it needs to be.
And you see backsliding. You see a lot of backsliding. So, John Mackey of Whole Foods, the wonderful conscious capitalism movement, Whole Foods with the sense of the Declaration of Interdependence from its founding, the idea that, there's not a conflict, that these are interdependent parts of the system, that employees matter. Whole Foods during the first recession, not the first, but the 2008 recession, laid off fewer people than Stanford University. It's a very, very good, benign organization. And then came the hedge funds. And now he's bought by Amazon. And John Mackey, the founder of Conscious Capitalism, stood up in front of an employee meeting. This is reported in the media, and says, I think we were too good to our team members or associates or employees, whatever he called them in that particular setting. And he's now responsible for taking $300 million of costs out of that business. And you can know where they're going to come from. And my friend George Zimmer ran the Men's Warehouse, fabulous organization, thrown out by the board, which got enormous amounts of media attention. And he said it took me 40 years to build a culture, and the new team about 6 months to destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that you talk about in the book, which we haven't actually got into yet, is kind of the other side of the coin. We've been talking a lot about business leadership. But why do people stay in toxic workplaces? If this is so unhealthy for people, why do people perpetuate this and keep this sustainable when it's clearly harmful to them?
So, number one, as you both know, finding a job is a job in and of itself. So in order to have the energy to find a job and the kind of the intellectual and physical resources to do that, you have to be basically healthy. And so one person said to me, she said, I could hardly remember what I told you 10 minutes ago. The idea that I could have the energy to go look for a new job and hit the ground and hit the ball out of the park on the first day of that job is just, whatever. So I think, number one, people are oftentimes so psychologically and physically damaged that they do not have the energy, the emotional, the physical resources to go out and look for a job. So that's, I think, number one. Number two, organizations play on people's egos. Aren't you good enough? If you're really tough, you put up with this. You'd figure out a way to make it work. Aren't you a real GE leader? Amazon is doing special things. If you were really any good, if we're only for special people, aren't you good enough? So that's it plays on people's egos, which works, I think, very effectively, particularly to highly talented people. And the third is, I've had people say to me, what makes me think that I can have a normal life that has, an ability for me to see my kids, an ability to, have good sleep and take care of myself, when all of my friends are not having this? What makes me think I'm so different and so special? So we have come in the United States of America and actually in workplaces all over the world to normalize the unacceptable. The unacceptable has become the norm.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. You see it everywhere.
And so if you see it everywhere, as you know, then the next question is, if you see it everywhere, what makes you think you're going to do better? And by the way, if you see it everywhere, this becomes, normal has within it the word norm. Norm means what everybody's doing. If every workplace, not every workplace, because Barry-Wehmiller doesn't do this, and Collective Health doesn't do this, and Patagonia certainly doesn't do this, etc. But, if most workplaces are like this, then this becomes what is accepted and what is expected.
So as we kind of wrap things up here, let's try to end with a little hope. What are some bright lights that you see out there? What are some, this is a tough thing, and it's going to, like you said, it's going to take a huge movement. It's going to take a lot of work to get these things turned around. But what are the lights of hope that you see out there?
Well, I think the lights of hope are that there are companies, DaVita, the kidney dialysis company being yet another one. There are obviously organizations that take seriously the idea, which I know Bob Chapman believes completely, which is, when a human being comes to work for Barry-Wehmiller or Patagonia or anything or any other workplace, that human being has entrusted their psychological and physical well-being to the organization and the people they're working for, and the organizations ought to take that stewardship responsibility seriously. Some do, not enough, but the some do gives you hope that maybe more will get the message. I think there are the cost pressures, and also, by the way, the performance pressures. It should not be surprising to anybody listening to this podcast that stressed employees are more likely to quit. Turnover is expensive. It should not surprise anybody, again, listening to this podcast, the data that I report in Dying for a Paycheck. Look, sick people are not as productive as people who are healthy. So we have created a situation in which organizations are losing as well, and maybe they will come to their senses. So I'm still waiting.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter @Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.